Now, how is it that these pro-Israel lobbies, which clearly work to influence U.S. policy, do not have to register under the Foreign Agents Registration Act, also known as FARA? FARA requires individuals representing foreign governments or entities in a political or quasi-political capacity to disclose their relationships and activities to the U.S. government. Recently, we've seen several members of the Trump administration either be convicted or suspected of violating the FARA Act, including Paul Manafort, Rudy Giuliani, and Rick Gates for lobbying on behalf of Ukraine, and Michael Flynn for lobbying on behalf of Turkey, for example, both of which, by the way, are allied countries. Yet we still went after these guys. So what makes Israel so unique? Well, AIPAC and similar organizations claim they're merely domestic lobbying groups. Now, how do they make that claim? Well, first, pro-Israel lobbies argue that their primary mission is to support U.S.-Israel relations from a domestic perspective rather than acting as foreign agents. They claim they represent American citizens who support Israel and that they don't represent Israel. Secondly, most of their money comes from these Americans and not from Israel. That's how they sort of get around this. However, AIPAC directly lobbies for pro-Israel policies, not for pro-Jewish American policies. CARE, the Council on American Islamic Relations, for example, advocates for all Muslim Americans, regardless of which country they come from. They advocate for civil rights legislation, to anti-discrimination measures, and immigration and refugee policies. They don't have a specific country they lobby on behalf of in the Muslim world. They're not advocating for pro-Saudi Arabia or pro-Malaysia or pro-Pakistan policies, for example. AIPAC, on the other hand, does very specifically advocate for pro-Israel policies. They just do it under the guise of, lots of Americans want us to do this. And of course, who controls the legislation of the FARA Act? Congress. And since Congress is heavily bought off by these pro-Israel lobbies, they're never going to make the rules against them. So let's look at some numbers. Since 1998, AIPAC has spent over $254 million on lobbying efforts. Here are a few examples of individual politicians and the money they've received from pro-Israel lobbies. Chuck Schumer received over $1.7 million. Lindsey Graham received over $1.2 million. Steny Hoyer, $1.1 million. Mitch McConnell, over $1 million. Representative Richie Torres received over $1.5 million. These lobbies are contributing this heavily to political campaigns in order to ensure that U.S. policies remain favorable to Israel. In return, what do we see? Unwavering support for Israel's actions, even when they are controversial or against international consensus. We see waves of politicians taking their trips to Israel, visiting the Wailing Wall, signing bombs, even though the vast majority, by the way, are Christians. They're going to the Wailing Wall, doing something that I believe Jewish people do, but these Christians are doing it because what are they doing? They're just, showing how much support they've got. Shouldn't American citizens be fully aware of our politicians receiving substantial foreign money to shape U.S. policies on behalf of that foreign country? Especially if those policies come at the expense of Americans' money, moral, and rights. Shouldn't these lobbies, and quite frankly, all of these politicians taking this money, which is nearly all of them, be subjected to the same regulations as Michael Flynn, Paul Manafort, and Rudy Giuliani? The American people deserve to know who is really pulling the strings behind the scenes. Why is it that we independent journalists are often accused of being paid by foreign governments to spread their propaganda? Yet, unlike most members of Congress, many of us have never taken a dime, yet we face endless threats of being investigated for being a foreign asset. Why are we not holding politicians, the ones who actually make laws in war, to the same standards as journalists? We need to demand greater transparency and ensure that our policies reflect the true interests of the American people and not the strategic goals of Israel. We should be demanding from our politicians that they redefine the FARA Act to include any sort of support for Israel. We should make it completely unacceptable for members of Congress to use foreign-backed studies to get Americans fired and to initiate laws that censor American speech.